Welcome to the show, Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain, and I am really delighted to have Dr. Alex Pattakos on the show today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Alex.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ruth. It's great to be here with you.
and I know that you have a very nice nickname, which is Dr. Meaning, based on your background research on Prisoner of Our Thoughts, in terms of the work that you are looking at translating from Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning. So I'm really excited to explore this topic in the context of brain health, because it's an area that we don't spend enough time, I think, dipping into and discussing. And it's one of the 4 quadrants of well-being, which is our spiritual well-being, and the other 3 are emotional, physical and mental. But we often forget this 4th quadrant, and it's so important and it's so vital in terms of how we live our lives. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about that topic in the context of how we can unchain our pain.
No, I'm very much welcome the opportunity to have a conversation with you about this. So great.
So for those that don't know Dr. Alex, he is the co-author with Elaine Dundon of the international best-selling book Prisoner of Our Thoughts, which is based on the wisdom of the world-renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Dr. Viktor Frankl. He and Elaine have also co-authored the award-winning book on the human quest for meaning, The Opal Way, which is grounded in Greek philosophy, mythology and culture, and backed by years and years of meaning research. He's a regular contributor to Psychology Today and honorary professor at the Moscow Institute of Psychoanalysis in Moscow, Russia. He's also a US Army veteran, and so really understands the challenges people face in today's uncertain times. And I just would love for you to tell people in your own words, what is it that you now, given your background experience, are really passionate about today?
God, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about life in all ways, and which is really kind of, and I can maybe get into this a little bit later, which is really the background behind this Greek-inspired book that we wrote called The Opal Way, and it's really about embracing life with attitude, among other things. Engaging with deeper purpose and connecting authentically with other people and other things, the environment and so forth. So it's the idea that integrated, holistic view of life is something that is really important to me personally. And obviously I bring that passion and enthusiasm to the people that around me, including clients, etc. So.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, because so often people live a life that is lacking in passion and lacking in purpose, and they think it's a really big thing to grasp, and so they don't take the time to look at what they're passionate and what is purposeful in their lives. Whereas actually we can just look at the ground roots of how can we live purposefully each and every day that is going to move us towards something that we enjoy doing. So I think it's a really exciting topic to talk about, and particularly for me, I love you to talk about connection, because connection is so important, and it's one of the 5 pillars of brain health. And when we look at the 5 pillars, we look at our feelings, our actions, our connections, our thoughts, and our surroundings, and they're all interrelated. And if we don't take the time to think about how can we connect with ourselves, and how can that inner connection facilitate our external connection with others, then we're really missing a fundamental part of our brain health.
Yeah, I would even take that further, and I can get into this in a little bit, because we distinguish purpose from meaning. And one of the things that I learned, not only from the work that I did with Viktor Frankl, but also, the Greek way, because going back to the ancient Greeks, and we'll hear a lot about Greece during this session here together, there's a notion that the unexamined life is not worth living. So the idea of examining our life and looking, as you say, not only about our connections with ourselves and with each other, but it's our connections with nature, it's our connections with the environment, and so forth. I mean, these are all part of what makes us human. And so a large part of the work that I'm going to share with you and the ideas really come from that perspective. It's not just about, as a matter of fact, it's not only, and I'll probably be a little bit maybe provocative or controversial on this program with you, because I am very spiritually grounded and spiritually motivated, which I learned, and I'll explain how that came about and what that means. And so the idea is that when I talk about brain health, it's not just about the cognitive functioning of the human brain. It's about a holistic, integrated approach to what makes us human, and that includes such things as our intuition, our ability to tap into our what we call our true nature or core essence of what makes us who we are. And I think that that's going to be a key element for this in terms of how I see, not only can we unchain our pain, but how can we optimize our entire being, which includes the brain health and includes so many other aspects.
I think that's such a great point, because we often see different parts of our body, don't we, in isolation, but especially when we talk about the brain, we kind of think that our head is detached from our body, and they don't talk to each other. And indeed, some people are stuck in the past and really don't think they talk to each other. Yeah, but we're an interconnected being, but we're not just an interconnected being to ourselves, but we're actually interconnected to the whole world around us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the energy that we, experience from other people, from the environment, from our spiritual connection, whether that's connection to nature or to a higher being or a higher purpose or a higher sense of meaning, whatever it is for that particular person. And also the connection we have to our past, the present time and on our future. And I don't think we really take that, like you say, that integrated holistic view of us as a human being. And it all starts with how we sense everything around us, our surroundings, how we sense ourselves, how we sense that connection. And that, as you say, is exactly what makes us human. So I'd love to explore how your journey that got you, because I know you're a US Army veteran, so I'd love it if you're willing to dive into your past and just tell us a little bit about the journey that got you to where you are today.
Yeah, but it'll definitely be a little bit, because it's very much of a zigzag path, and and the things that I'm doing today are probably not things that when I was younger I would even expect were going to be part of my human plan, if you will, my strategic plan, because I did not plan to do a lot of the things that I've done over the years. But yeah, I mean, it goes back. I mean, first of all, I mean, as a quick side note here, I've always been interested in mental health. Yeah, and that goes back. It's partly because of my upbringing, part of some of the issues that I had. Not only as a child, as an adolescent, with people that I knew, friends, family members, and so forth. I happened to live at one point near a state mental hospital when I was younger. And I was always intrigued by what goes on in that place, behind the fence, behind the wall. And so I ended up eventually getting involved in the mental health field when I volunteered for the draft. And again, this is going to date myself, but as you're going to tell, I'm older. But I volunteered for the Army just as the beginning of the Vietnam era. And so, and of course, the Vietnam era was something at that time I was thinking, oh yeah, well, I'm going to stop the world from communism. I'm going to be, try to be with my friends. We're all going to be American heroes, because it was the U.S. Army. And obviously I had a rude awakening, if you will, to say the least. But when I was in the military, I had the good fortune, because of my background and interest in mental health, I was kind of channeled into studying with psychiatrists at a number of different bases, but including a U.S. Army hospital. And I ended up getting certified to basically do not just intake work, but case management work in the mental health field with veterans that were coming back from Vietnam as well. But I ended up living overseas in a couple of places, but eventually landed in West. At that time, it was West Germany, in Heidelberg, And
Wow.
I worked in a psychiatric facility there. And I also worked in a correctional stockade. And these were all mental health issues that were being faced by the military veterans. And then I also had the opportunity to work with many of their families. And so that was like, again, an eye opener for me, because the training that I had received at that time was pretty much grounded in Freudian thought, and the whole idea of regression therapy, and what did you do and how were you potty trained and all that kind of stuff. And that never resonated with me. But I had read a book, Man's Search for Meaning, when I was in high school. And so that became kind of something that latched onto my soul, if you will. And so when I got out of the military, I also had done some work as a journalist. And then I started working with in another mental health profession in the state of Illinois, in the States. And so I worked in a state mental hospital, mainly with inpatients who were diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Right.
And so that opens up your eyes. And I'm a young person at this time. So I mean, it's like, this is kind of like, I remember the first time I was thrown into a padded cell with a young adolescent who was what they call the headbanger. And they wanted to they were watching me, the people that were hiring me for this position, and they wanted to see what I would do for this person banging his head up against the wall. It was padded. He wore a helmet, but he had cauliflower eyes and ears, and he was all beat up and self-abuse. But that experience really got me into thinking, what's behind all this stuff? What are the things that motivate human beings to not just abuse themselves, abuse others, be angry? Why do we have anger management? Why do we have all these things? And so I get closer and closer to Viktor Frankl's ideas. I reread Man's Search for Meaning. I got involved in a number of other, along the way, a couple of other jobs that brought me closer and closer. And then eventually, and I'm making a long story short here, I was elected president of a international nonprofit organization that was focused on elevating the human spirit at work.
Wow.
And that position brought me in touch with people from a lot of charlatans, a lot of quacks, but a lot of really good, sound people who are really interested in raising human consciousness. And this included people who are associated with, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Institute for Noetic Sciences, but it's really about shifting consciousness. And what is consciousness? I can explain that later if you'd like. And anyway, so that position brought me all over the world, basically. And one of the places I was able to visit and spend time in was Vienna, Austria. And before I went to Vienna, I contacted Dr. Frankl's family, Dr. Frankel through his family, and had the opportunity to go to Vienna and meet with him and spend some time talking about a book that I wanted to write, and which is actually a version of the book that I'm doing right now. And at that time, I remember explaining what I wanted to do, and he grabbed my arm and he said, "Alex, yours is the book that needs to be written." And so that became kind of like a brand in my soul, a tattoo on my soul. And at that point, I said, I have to finish this book. I have to spread this message of meaning, because no matter what experiences I've had up to that point, seeing this person and now basically standing on his shoulders and understanding what he had been through. And I've been through a lot of stuff. I've been to hell and back a few times, but to know what he had been through, I just think, okay, if he could find meaning in all the suffering, all the pain, all the things that were, this guy was an inspiration. He was a giant in my mind. And so at that point I said, this is what I've got to commit my life to. So at that point, this became the search for meaning, not just for me, but for people I work with, I encounter, became a life mission. And so that's basically where I am today. I'm still doing it.
Wow.
And the nickname Dr. Meaning came from, doing conferences, keynote addresses, and people finally, one day I was at a conference and I was introduced as Dr. Meaning, and then it stuck after that.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think, for those people that haven't read Viktor Frankl's book, it is absolutely phenomenal. And for me, I know you mentioned that you went to Germany. So one of my interests when I was going through my education was to learn about why the Germans and why we had this Holocaust issue, and who were the Germans today, versus the people that, you know, committed these atrocities. And I was fascinated with kind of building the bridge and making that connection, because who we are today is not who we were 50, 100 years ago.
That's right.
And I went to Buchenwald, which is one of the concentration camps, when I was probably about 11 or 12, to experience just the pain and the suffering that they went through, and to read about it in the way that Viktor Frankl described just really brings it home, doesn't it, as to how important it is to find a way to get through whatever trauma it is that you're experiencing. And the way that he found it was through meaning. So I would love for you to describe or define what meaning really is, because I know you said there was a difference between meaning and purpose.
Right.
What is the definition of meaning?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying something here, since this is inside the sessions of, you know, your podcast is titled Brain Health. What is optimal brain health to me? And it really relates and resonates with me in terms of the title of our book, Prisoners of Our Thoughts. Yeah. Because to me, optimal brain health is our ability to, one, not be a prisoner of our thoughts, and two, not to hold others a prisoner in our thoughts. And so if we can do that, that's going to require a lot of stuff. That's you know, the kind of work that you do with people, the kind of work that I do is to help people get out of that. Because when you start talking about things like, you know, a Nazi concentration camp, or, you know, we had prisoners of war in Vietnam and so forth, those are physical incarcerations. And I've done a lot of work with inmates as well, by the way, in prisons. And there's one thing being a prisoner physically incarcerated in a concentration camp or a prison or a jail. And then there's other kinds of prisons. There are intermental concentration camps, intermental prisons that hold us back from being all we can be. And Dr. Frankl talked about that. I talk about that a lot. And it's how do we escape that? And so part of the idea of unchaining your pain is unchaining yourself by finding the key to your inner mental prison, your inner mental jail cell that's holding you back from doing other things. And like you mentioned earlier, before we just started, working with people with PTSD, you know, and I've had a lot of experience in that realm as well. And as you know, there are a lot of people that think that in addition to post-traumatic stress disorder, there's also post-traumatic, growth potential. Yeah. And so it's how we look at it. And so part of this goes back to not being a prisoner of our thoughts, being open-minded and seeing that. So question, purpose versus meaning. You know, purpose in many respects, and I'll get into this when I talk a little bit about the Opal Way. I gotta put it out there, because the Greeks are very good about expressing themselves and about understanding what it is that makes life meaningful and so forth, that brings joy to the villages and so forth. And so the Opal Way book was building on about 7 years of research and experiences around this Greek experience. And I think it's important to understand that purpose is certainly a part of our formula for meaning, because to have an engagement with a deeper purpose, not just the purpose of, you know, getting up in the morning and getting a coffee or a tea, a cuppa, since you're in the UK. It's also the opportunity to understand, as you said, how do we connect authentically with other people, with the environment, with our neighbors. That's a component of meaning as well. And then the third thing, which is really part of the Greek experience and in the Opal Way, but it's also a key element of Dr. Frankl's system of logotherapy, is the ability to understand that everybody who's listening to this has the ultimate freedom to choose their attitude. So choosing your attitude, especially when you're undergoing some sort of suffering, is an important element of meaning. Okay, so the idea is that meaning is different than purpose, in the sense that even if, like, a child dies before birth, premature, that does not mean that child does not have meaning. It may not have been able to fulfill a purpose in terms of its purpose that, hopefully we were all allowed to do, that we can be whatever we can become. But or you die tragically in an accident, or you're somebody who has an incurable disease, the purpose that person might want to pursue is no longer available to him or her. but
Mhm.
he or she still has a life that is meaningful, that has meaning to it. And so
Mhm.
it's up to us to find it. So as Dr. Frankl would say, there's a seed of meaning in every moment of our lives.
Yeah, and I can really relate to that story, you know, because I lost a baby through miscarriage, and it was really traumatic, you know, experience. Even though it was an early miscarriage, it was very traumatic. Obviously, our hormones go through a huge surge and then a massive crash. And what got me through was really finding the meaning in that experience, and the meaning that that child that unfortunately didn't have a life left in me, to know that actually I was not creating the right environment for that child to grow, and I didn't have the knowledge to know what that right environment needed to be, even though I've PhD in medical imaging, but actually I hadn't taken the time to invest in how to be an effective nurturer of a human. And so I had to take that as owning that issue, and take the meaning from that experience and go, do you know what? I'm going to create the best environment that I can possibly create for any future child that I'm able to make. And that means that I have to make changes to my habits, my behaviors, to how I see the world, how I connect with what is important to me in terms of creating the right status in my body as a female. And we know that it's really important, you know, managing our stress levels is really important. There's so many things that are dependent on creating that right nurturing environment, whether that's in the womb or beyond the womb, to help people really live a meaningful life in whatever way they choose to find that meaning. So that story really resonates with me, because I can relate to that.
And you raised some really important points in terms of your experience, because in some respects, it's important from our perspective and from Dr. Frankl's perspective, that is different than many other people might say about the topic, is that we don't create meaning. We find meaning. We discover meaning. So meaning is already there. Okay, it's in the universe. You know, whatever your metaphysical orientation may be, whatever your spiritual, faith-based orientation may be, there's something out there that's greater than ourselves. And that's how I believe. And so the thing is that the issue about meaning is that we are being challenged to answer to life, to answer life's call. We're being challenged to discover, to find the meaning in every situation. Now, obviously, we don't do that in everything that happens, but we should at least be doing that for the key milestones of our life. And so when you have a miscarriage, part of your meaning was to discover what that was. Part of your purpose was to discover that meaning. And in some respects, your unborn child's purpose was to educate you and provide you with an opportunity, whether you take it or not everybody does that, to explore the deeper meaning of that experience. And the more that we can do that, that gets back to the Greek idea that the unexamined life is not worth living. And the issue is, as Franco would say, you don't have to suffer to learn. But if you don't learn from your suffering, your life is becoming meaningless. You know, you're losing the sense of meaning. And you mentioned the word sense. You know, sense, like Prisons of Our Thoughts, in one of the earlier editions, was published in Spanish under the title of En Busca del Sentido. Sentido is meaning, but it also relates to sense. And so when you think about making sense of something, it's finding the meaning in it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an important element for your listeners to understand, is that we're being challenged by life. You know, life doesn't just happen to us. We happen to life, and we make it meaningful, whether we like it or not.
And I do know, I think that's a really poignant point, particularly given how life has evolved in the last 2 years with COVID.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to explore really the topic of prisoners of our thoughts, because I'm reading a book at the moment called Think Unbroken, by Michael Anthony, where he says that we have about 30,000 thoughts every day, and we spend about 70% of our time listening to the negative thoughts and not enough time listening to the positive ones. And actually, when I had some adverse childhood experiences, and when I was 15, I drew a picture as if I was a prisoner in my mind. And you can find it on my website, on the Wellbeing Warrior Academy page, where I'm actually trapped in my mind, in a maze in my mind, and I can't get out. And that's exactly how I felt. And obviously, maybe the reason I was so interested in the Holocaust experience and everything else was trying to learn how people escaped. Because ultimately, when you experience external trauma, sometimes the escape is within, and you have to go inside to find, like you say, the meaning. But sometimes we don't find it, and so we become a prisoner within our own mind because of the thoughts keep playing, and we feel trapped. Yes. So how do you feel the life has shifted for people in the last 2 years, where perhaps people have become more prisoners of their thoughts, or prisoners of other people's thoughts, as you mentioned earlier? What's really changed from your experience?
Yeah. Well, that's a tough question in some respects, because on the one hand, I'm seeing a lot more people who, even though they may not have yet escaped the prison of their thoughts, their inner mental prison, they're much more aware that prison exists. And that's a step. That's kind of like the first step of the 12-step program, right? Is being aware that maybe I'm holding back because I'm, a prisoner of my own thoughts, or I'm holding Dr. Ruth a prisoner in my thoughts. She's this way and not that way, kind of thing. So I'm seeing that's a trend. But what I'm also seeing, which is disturbing to me, and I do write for a number of different online media, including Psychology Today, and I wrote a piece for Psychology Today about collective guilt, because, like Dr. Frankl, I don't believe in collective guilt, which is basically the idea that because you're a member of a group, either an ethnic group, a religious group, or whatever, and that group, somebody in that group did something terrible, like the Nazis did in World War II, that every subsequent and every other German, therefore, is guilty of that atrocity.
Yeah.
And then many people believe that they feel, well, they're part of that. And we saw the same thing in 9/11, where after 9/11, every Saudi Arabian, every Muslim was obviously a terrorist. And so that's another manifestation of what we call collective guilt. And so the idea here is that I'm seeing a lot more collective guilt today because, for example, we're battling people who are vaxxed versus unvaxxed.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a vaccination, you're obviously far right. You're a neo-Nazi. You're all the problems you can imagine. And that's really a sad commentary on society today and humanity, is for us to not learn from the past. Let's not recreate what led to the Holocaust and have, now we're having versions, people call it medical apartheid and so forth. And I think that this is the kind of thing that I've been battling against and been arguing against for a long time. So, and that's a whole other issue, but it's important. So,
but it kind of goes back to the first principle, doesn't it, that you talk about in your book, Prisons of Our Thoughts, which is our freedom to choose our own attitude.
Our own attitude, exactly. I mean, the ancient Greeks said this, and Viktor Frankl was very much influenced by Greek philosophy as well. As a matter of fact, logotherapy, which was his system of psychotherapy, is grounded in the word logos, which is a Greek word, logos. And the logos is interpreted typically as the word, as reason. It's kind of the base word of the word logical. It's also a root word of the word dialogue and so forth. But it's an ancient Greek word. And if you go to the pre-Socratics, that is before Socrates' time, to places, people like Heraclitus, the logos also had a spiritual meaning. And so when you have, for example, authentic dialogue is actually not just a pool of understanding. It's not just cognitively understanding what the message that we're trying to get, what the meaning is of a particular issue. Authentic dialogue is actually a connection of collective spirit. So when people are in actual dialogue, true dialogue, you can they resonate with each other in terms of quantum mechanics. You can actually feel that. And then you've probably seen this at work or in places where people are really having an open and transparent discussion, which is a true dialogue. And all of a sudden somebody they don't like, maybe it's a boss, a supervisor, sticks his or her head in the room. And what happens? The energy takes a dive.
And I think also here, you don't have to talk to have that true connection either.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, you can have that authentic dialogue without physically talking.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, a number of years ago, actually, before I met Dr. Frankl to talk about what became Prisoners of Our Thoughts, I was participating in a dialogue session in Switzerland. And we had people from all over the world, many, many different languages. Many people spoke, obviously, no English, or no German or French. And we couldn't communicate with each other through language, but we communicated through body language.
Yeah.
And you can tell when somebody actually was a kind person, was somebody that you wanted to be a friend with, and so forth. So you're absolutely correct. There's again, this gets into the metaphysical dimension of health. You know, that we're connected in ways that we don't know. I mean, there's a saying, you know, in our books that we don't know what we don't know. You know, and that's part of what drives our intuitive capacity.
Yeah, we see it in dogs as well, don't we? That connection that people have with service dogs, and
absolutely.
You know, how they detect people who are about to have an epileptic fit, for example, or about to have a seizure, is this connection that isn't verbal.
That's right.
But it exists.
It exists. And so the only way to be able to understand that and believe in that is that and this is part of the challenge I'm going to give to you when you start talking about brain health, is that you have to really be careful, very careful, that you use brain health, because the word itself sounds like it's a total physiological phenomenon, and all I want is an MRI and blah, 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 and you'll light up this part of my brain and everything will be great. No, we're human beings, and part of our humanness is what we call, instead of the mind-body-spirit connection, we refer to it as a spirit-mind-body connection. And so that human spirit is the thing that kept Viktor Frankl alive. That human spirit is the thing that kept me alive in many cases, in my experiences. And it's that, and as soon as you start losing that, as soon as your sense of spirit, which that spirit is also, again, going back to the logos in dialogue and logotherapy, it's really therapy through meaning. It's therapy, even deeper, therapy through spirit. It's a spiritual connection. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about church. Right? I mean, you can do whatever whoever's listening to this, whatever your faith-based orientation is, go for it. I'm just saying is that the spiritual connection that we have as human beings, including our spiritual connection to animals, as you said, to nature, in terms of the trees and the ocean and so forth. I mean, these are all elements that make us part of what the Greeks call Gaia. It's Mother Earth, it's the universe. And I think that's the part, as you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic about this topic, but that's the thing that we have to get people to understand. Because right now we don't have it. What we're doing is we are reducing people to their component parts. Yeah. And I argued the other day, I'm sorry to interrupt you here. You can tell.
No, that's okay. I love that. I keep going. I'm loving this topic.
I was a professor for a long time, and I'm Greek, so I happen to move my arms a lot. It's better in person, believe me, because I can walk around and everything else. But the idea here is that we don't have, like, even in the UK, we don't have a national public health system. We don't really have a health system that's integrated, holistic. What we have is a disease management system.
Yeah, and we don't have a health system. It's a disease management system. It's not about be well.
Exactly.
Treat sickness.
That's right. There's so many things about nutrition, about breathing, about exercise, there's so many things outside of getting a jab. Yeah. And somehow we don't discuss that. We don't promote that on the national media.
And do you know what? You're going to get me started. I'm going to get on my hobby horse soon as well. As I think it's so that is such an important point, is that we take such a narrow view of health, and brain health. Some people talk about brain health, and that's hopefully not me, in a very narrow-minded way. But for me, and talked about this really at the beginning, is it covers 4 quadrants of your well-being, which is your emotional well-being, your physical, your mental, and your spiritual. Right. And people often forget the spiritual element.
Absolutely.
That is so fundamental. If we don't have that, then we're missing a huge part of what makes us well, and what allows us to optimize ourselves and live live a life of meaning. And I think, you know, if we reflect on some of the messaging that is coming out, is the fact that because it's so narrowly focused on fixing the sickness rather than teaching people how to be well, which is one of the missions of the academy I'm establishing, is that people don't learn to get better. They're just constantly fighting sickness.
That's right.
And so it goes back to not taking ownership.
Absolutely. And this is another key point of Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, is that we have to have personal responsibility and collective responsibility, not just for saying, okay, well, we're all going to get injections and therefore I'm responsible. No, you may be just following whatever the dictates are, the narrative.
Yeah.
Being personally responsible for your own health is something we're losing a lot of. And so people we're assuming that better living through chemistry. Just give me I used to be an advisor. I used to work with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And I know personally that, that many of the people, the scientists and so forth that work in FDA are really committed to public health. But I know on a political level, there are many people that have another agenda. And I think it's really important for us to understand that ultimately health is our responsibility. And obviously there are going to be people that have certain conditions that require intervention. I'm not denying that, but I'm just saying is that there's so much that we can do for each other and for ourselves by being role models for optimal health rather than being somebody waiting to get sick. Now give me a drug, give me some pill or whatever.
That will fix it.
And that'll fix it. And it's not going to happen. And so I think those are some of the things. And if I get back to purpose and meaning again, the purpose is more of a destination. It's like understanding. You can change that all the time. I mean, think about how many times you've changed destination in your life, in my life. These are our purposes. And some of our purposes are many purposes. Like, our purpose is, to get to work on time or whatever. Nowadays, you don't have to do that. You just go from your bedroom to your computer to get on Zoom, just about for a lot of people. But the idea is that that's a purpose, but there are deeper purposes. And so what do we mean then by meaning in that sense? How do you differentiate? Well, the meaning, many people define meaning as being doing something or being significant. So I have a good job, I have a significant role in my community. That's one way of looking at meaning, okay? But meaning to Elaine, my co-author and wife, and I, is deeper than that. It has a spiritual connotation again. It's about connecting with our true nature, our core essence. And you go, what the hell is that? Okay. Well, you got to explore it. You got to do some.
You got to go and find what's you.
Exactly. You got to go
understand your authentic self.
Exactly. Your inner self. Find out. And people say, well, how do I know what's meaningful for me? Well, I can tell you right now that I ask people, I know some people don't like me saying this, but I can say, well, let's make a list in your workplace or in your personal relationships or whatever, what's meaningless. So we make a list of things that are meaningless things. And I say, okay, well, how do we convert that now? How do we turn that over? And I'm not telling, somebody said the other day, that's a bad recommendation because you're just telling me I should go do more and more meaningless things and I'll find meaning. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, look at your life, look at your trajectory and say, what are some of the things at work or in my relationships or whatever that I find meaningless? And then say, okay, now what can I do? What personal responsibility can I take to change it even a little bit and work? Because the more you do that, you start filling your gas tank, your fuel tank with meaning. But if you don't do that, you're in a dead end job. I mean, I used to go into companies doing a lot of consulting before COVID. And I literally, I don't know if you're familiar with the movie, The Sixth Sense, but I could walk into I could walk into a company environment and I say, I see dead people because they're coming to work, but they leave their soul at home.
Yeah. And I used to be that person where there was no soul, there was no meaning, there was no passion, no nothing.
Yeah. So what do you do about it? And so if you think about that, let's look at passion in another way as well. Let's use the word that we use in the Opal Way, enthusiasm. What is enthusiasm? Well, that comes from two Greek words, and it basically means manifesting the God, the divine, or the spirit within. So if you're not enthusiastic about your relationship, if you're not enthusiastic about your work, about whatever you may be doing, basically what that means is that you're not manifesting your inner self, your inner spirit. And so how are you going to change that? What are you going to do? What are you going to do differently? And I think those are the kinds of existential questions that more and more people since COVID began are starting to ask themselves. Not everybody has the answers. They need to go to you. Then maybe some come to me. They read a book. They go to a workshop. They go on a retreat if they can, maybe a virtual one at least. But they have to spend some time doing the self-discovery. And if there's anything good that'll come out of COVID, hopefully we can get out of COVID before everybody turns into living under totalitarian rule. But hopefully that people will know more about themselves. I mean, know thyself. It's on the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. I mean, know thyself. What does that mean? And that's part of finding meaning. And if we don't do that, meaning doesn't just pop up here without our awareness. We have to, and that's why you see a lot of people getting into mindfulness, which basically is an evolution from meditation. And so what does that mean? It means, like, how do we get in touch with who we really are? And I think that's what you're trying to do with brain health. It's not just when I agreed to be with you today. I mean, somebody asked me, he said, well, why are you going on a brain health podcast? It says, you're into spirituality and deep meaning. And it says, you're not just in it. No, I'm not looking at it like we're going to all do a brain scan together and looking at that's the answer.
Cool.
You know what I mean? So I think it's important for us to understand that. And so I hope that your listeners, when they do listen to this, and we're recording this, we're not live.
We are, yeah.
Yeah. That they gain some awareness, some heightened awareness, which is basically what the definition of meditation is. It's heightened awareness of who they are, how they relate to other people, how they relate to the environment in a broader sense, and then find some deeper sense, i.e. meaning, in that understanding.
So I'd love to transition to a quick fun facts questionnaire for you now, because
I know you can send me those.
Fun facts is looking at the 5 pillars of brain health, and the first is feelings, second is our actions, the third is our connections, the fourth is our thoughts, and the fifth is our surroundings. So I'm not going to go through all of them, just coming to ask you a couple.
Hey, I'm ready for them.
Okay, let's just smash through this, because I'd love to hear your perspective. So starting off with feelings. What is the funniest or most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you?
Yeah, well, I thought about that for a bit when I got your instructions, and I would have to say, going back a long time, back when I was a senior in high school, right? I had a part in the first time our high school ever did a musical, and it was My Fair Lady, all right, which you're familiar with, obviously. Yeah. And I had a key role in My Fair Lady. And during that time, I was in a scene, and it was a full house in the theater, and there was a scene that was very serious, and all of a sudden the audience started laughing. And here I am talking and I had to sing a song, and everybody's laughing, and I'm thinking, what is going on here, right? Well, as it turned out, everybody was hilarious, and I'm going, am I that good, or I'm supposed to be doing a serious role here, and everybody's laughing. Well, I found out afterwards that during the scene, I had been pushed down by, I don't know if you remember My Fair Lady, Eliza Doolittle. And when I fell down, I tore my pants. Oh, and when I got up, my pants were all ripped in the back. And I tell you want to talk about being embarrassed when you get off stage? And everybody said, I said, is everybody laughing? And they said, because you tore your pants and you can see your underwear. So that was my most embarrassing moment. I mean,
well, at least you were wearing underwear, eh?
Yeah, at least I had underwear on, exactly. And as a teenager, it was, it was hard enough. It was the first time we did a musical, and at that time, it was like, we really wanted to be perfect. But fortunately, I got a chance to come up again the next night and the night after that, so it worked.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, because that just takes me back to my dad's show stage, and I had some flashbacks of my dad doing hysterical things on the stage, actually being in a Greek show and not wearing enough clothing as part of the shows. So
there you go.
So I'm going to go on to another fun fact is connection, because I know we talked about this. So connection to yourself. What is the most important value that guides you in life?
Value or role model? What was that? Are we talking about person?
Well, connection to others is role models. So, okay. But internally, what really guides you? What's your guide?
In Prisoners of Our Thoughts, we define one key dimension of Dr. Frankl's logotherapy as the will to meaning. And the will to meaning, as opposed to the will to pleasure or the will to power, The will to meaning is defined in our book as an authentic commitment to meaningful values and goals. And so if I think of it in that way, what's driven my life, even way before I understood that this was about a meaning journey, was the fact that my commitment was to meaningful values. I had to do something that was meaningful, that I felt I was making a positive, meaningful difference. And if I didn't, I'd change jobs, I'd change relationships, I'd do whatever. And so meaning as a value is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and I don't think people talk about meaning as a value very often.
Yeah. Well,
and I think it's a really great point. Is that
more and more now, when they get around me, they do, or they fake it, or they fake it.
So another one on connection is who's been your role model?
Well, I thought about that, and obviously, besides my wife, who's certainly a role model and a muse, I've also been, major impact was my father, obviously, and obviously, the most, the one that's probably most well known, people know
in a
about,
positive way,
is Viktor Frankl. Huh? What's that?
So for your dad, was he a positive role model in that you wanted to emanate what how he behaved?
Well, it's his spirit. He died at a young age, and so he's passed now, and so I didn't get a chance to experience him later in life, which we would have spent more time. He was very busy and so forth. But let me just give you two quick examples of why he's a role model to me. One of them is he was committed to meaningful values. As an example, he also was in the military during World War II, and he served with a unit that actually liberated the camps. So that was a major part of his experience, which, he didn't talk much about World War II, but I do know that, and I do know that he did some very special things then. The second thing is that our family, and my father instilled this in me, probably in my DNA as well, is from an area of the island of Crete in Greece that is very well known historically as being one of the few areas that was never fully occupied by the Romans, the Venetians, the Egyptians, the Turks. They all tried to control Crete, the island of Crete. And this area is called Sfakia. And so my family's from there. And so they're very much revolutionaries, and they have a revolutionary, almost like Spartan spirit. They won't take no for an answer. If you tell them you can't do it, they'll find a way to do it. And I think that my father instilled that sense of value and spirit in me, as well as probably physiologically in my DNA, that, I have to keep, I'm like the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah. Wow. Do I think my dad personally was a real role model for me too, in terms of his values and how he lived. And actually I learned a tremendous amount from him after he passed away. Yeah. And I wish I'd taken the time to listen and learn when he was on this planet. Yeah. But I'm really grateful that his legacy that he's left me with is one that I can constantly find meaning in and try and live my life in a way that he lived his. And one of his underlying principles was kindness. Mm-hmm. And he was extraordinary, unconditionally kind. It was always put into the bank of giving, but never expect to draw from it. Never expect anything back. Always focus on giving to others and supporting others. And he, the number of people present at his funeral was just testament to his kind nature.
Yeah. That's a wonderful attribute to emulate, and that's certainly a legacy that hopefully you and I can pass on as well. So thanks for sharing that.
No, you're welcome. So I'd love to go on to the fourth pillar, which is our thoughts. What is the most stupid or crazy thought you've often told yourself in the past that isn't true?
Okay, well, let me, if you don't mind, let me think about that for 1 second. But I think that there was another question that you had asked before about what's the craziest thing you've done, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's on actions, yeah.
And if I can start with that and then get into...
Oh, yeah, definitely. Okay. Let's go with that.
All right. A number of years ago, again, when I was working for a mental health agency in the U.S., I was working in a mental health facility, again, that was primarily inpatients that were paranoid personalities, schizophrenics, and so forth. And I was sitting in a group session, if you will, watching a NFL football game on TV with these patients. We were just kind of casually at that point. There was no therapeutic, exercise going on. And one of the patients, these are all people from, this is the city of Chicago, south side of Chicago, said, we're watching the game and there were a lot of seats in the stadium that were empty. And this patient said, I've lived my whole life in Chicago. I've never been in that stadium, which is Soldier Field is the name of the stadium. And I've never got a chance to watch a football game. And because I noticed all these seats were empty, I decided afterwards to go and call up the Chicago Bears, which was the team that was their home stadium, if I could bring some patients to see a football game and fill up some of those empty seats. Well, the person that was at the office that answered the phone just treated me like I was the patient, that I was crazy, and I could never do this. And as it turns out, instead of giving up, as I told you earlier, it's kind of this can-do thing, I decided to contact the media and tell them that we have these mental patients that are inpatients that have lived their whole life in this area, and they've never had a chance to go to a football game, and the stadium is half empty. They've got all these seats. Why can't we bring some of them there to it? They won't be dangerous. We'll watch them and everything else. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that got on the TV. It was in all the newspapers, all the tabloids and everything else, and it was back and forth, debates over it. People bought these seats. They're reserved. How can you do this? You're going to bring crazies into this stadium. They're going to kill somebody, whatever. Well, as it turned out, I got a call that a group of people who owned reserved some of the seats said, we'll donate the seats to you to take your patients to the stadium. So I brought 12 schizophrenic patients into Soldier Field to watch a football game. I have no idea to this day whether or not who won the game. I wrote about this in another book, by the way, this story. And everybody thought this was the craziest thing. CBS said, this guy is totally Dr. Strangelove. He's crazy as hell. He's going to bring crazies into the public square here, and they're going to be there and whatever. And they had the time of their life. I mean, I couldn't care less about the game. It was well, anyway, the book that the story was written in is called Positively Mad. And MAD is an acronym. Positively make a difference. Make a difference. So that was a crazy thing, but making a difference in people's lives was very meaningful. Yeah. So what's the craziest thought? The craziest thought for me, and I learned this the hard way, and I'm sure most of your listeners can resonate and relate to this, is that I'm in control of my life. That's a crazy thought for me, because I realized that once I started to let go, once I started to appreciate life, once I started to realize that things happen for a reason, I was able to flow with whatever current was taking me downstream or upstream, however you want to look at it. And I realized that control is an illusion. And I have to be willing. And the only thing I can control, basically, the only thing I really is myself in terms of my attitude. I can change my attitude, but I can't change other people. I can't change, things that maybe ought to be changed, but and if I don't, I can't control them. I can't mold them in the way I want them to be. I have to change myself. If I can't change a situation, we're being challenged to change ourselves. Yeah. And I think that's so important. That point is because we can spend an exorbitant amount of energy and time trying to control the uncontrollable. Exactly. And not spending any time learning how to control ourselves. Yeah. And then we wonder why our attitude goes down, why our sense of self-worth goes down. I mean, this is where we talk about a meaning fuel gauge. Is that all of a sudden the tank starts going empty, because all of a sudden we stop connecting with people, which is a concern during COVID. It's during the pandemic. People don't have the connections they had before. It really bothers me to see kids with masks on. I don't like masks, period. Yeah. But it removes the human connection. I mean, there's so many people that I'm kind of going, I don't even know what you look like. Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, if you wore a mask, you were a bank robber. You know what I mean? Yeah. And now we're becoming accustomed. Now the companies that are making money these days are mask and plexiglass manufacturers. I mean, it's like we're dividing people. We're not bringing them together. And I think that's a major problem. in terms of the future of humanity.
Do you know, I think it's so important that we do find that sense of meaning in ourselves and that sense of understanding how we can control our attitude in any given circumstance. And I'd love for you to now, if we can shift it to what would you, on the last pillar is surroundings, what is the most beautiful place you've ever visited and what makes it so special?
Well, again, listeners, I don't want to be totally a marketing person, but I have to share with you. This is our book, The Opal Way, in English. It's also in Greek, if anybody wants to read Greek. And this is the Greek-inspired book on meaning. And then, of course, you've got the Prisons of Our Thoughts somewhere. There it is. Okay.
I do. I have it on my.
Yeah.
My Kindle, so I don't have it available to hold, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's in 23 languages. So if you speak other languages, I'm sure you can find the right one, and more on the way. Based on the Opal Way experience and based on my heritage, clearly the most important place I've ever visited. Actually, I've spent more time there, so I don't consider it a visit anymore, because we actually lived part-time, over the years before COVID, is Greece. And the reason for that is not just the weather, not just the food, which I love Greek food. And I'm talking about good Greek food. I'm talking about, the salads, the seafood, all this stuff. But I'm talking about the people, the spirit of the people. And if you read the Opal Way, and I encourage everybody to read the Opal Way because it's another way of, and actually we actually incorporate the Opal concept into the 3rd edition of Prisoners of Our Thoughts. It's the notion of Opa is about O, connecting meaningfully with others, P, engaging with deeper purpose, and A, embracing life, all of life, with attitude. We found that formula for meaning we found in Greece because people there are looking for joy in their life. They are incredibly hospitable. I mean, the Greek, the king of the gods, Zeus, was also the god of hospitality. The Greeks really believe it's in their DNA that they take care of strangers. They showed that during the beginning of the refugee crisis, for example. But if you go visit there, you're not a stranger. There's a saying in Crete, for example, if you're ever lost, knock on somebody's door. You can't do that in many places around the world because first I think you're crazy and they'll shoot you or stab you, whatever. So the Greeks are very hospitable. They have a spirit that is very resilient and so forth. And it's just a way of life. And so the idea of writing the Opal Way, which is subtitled Finding Joy and Meaning in Everyday Life and Work, was really to capture and bottle that spirit that Elaine and I found in Greece during our travels over 7 years and bringing it back to, in our case, initially to North America, so that because people are stressed out, they're getting unhealthy, they don't eat right, the Greeks don't have to go to a gym to go work out. They walk everywhere. They don't have intergenerational problems like we have at a lot of the places. Multi-generations go out to dinner together, to lunch together, they walk together, they party together, they dance together. I'm a little concerned now with COVID that it's kind of minimizing a lot of that connection. But I think that spirit, that ability to be fully human is probably the most wonderful thing. And I use this a lot when I give speeches and so forth, when I talk about how do I know when I'm elevating the human spirit with meaning. And I described it as kind of like taking the top off the box of Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. If you put Peter Pan's, Tinkerbell in a box and you close it, her light goes out. And I can see people, you can see, you see it yourself, whether they're enthusiastic, whether they're manifesting the spirit within, or whether they're depressed, whether they feel like life has no purpose, no meaning, that they're kind of giving up. And I think that my commitment to everybody that listens, and I know you're doing the same thing, Dr. Ruth, is commitment to people and helping others find joy and meaning and health, including brain health, as you defined it more holistically in their life. And I think that that's a key mission that I wish more of us would prescribe to.
And thank you for sharing that, because I think the impact our surroundings have had in the last 2 years from a COVID perspective is in terms of how we've lost that connection to an environment that was really serving us in a positive way, to now being very much isolated physically.
Yeah.
And that whole dynamic of the human interaction that we talked about earlier has shifted, and it'd be interesting to see, and we won't see it to the extent now, but we'll probably see it further down the line, the impact that will have on people's mental health.
We're seeing it now. I don't have COVID. I'm coughing.
That's okay.
No, you're absolutely right. We're seeing it now as well.
Yeah.
The collateral damage from these policies are horrendous. They're horrific. And the teen suicide, depression, aggression, all the things that Viktor Frankl talked about at the end of World War II, when he talked about what he called the mass neurotic triad: aggression, depression, and addiction. We're seeing more of that now than we did after World War II.
And actually, COVID has a huge impact on our brain health.
Absolutely.
Which people are not really talking about at all.
No.
To the extent that they really need to. And I'm not just talking about people developing conditions, but the symptoms getting worse. So if you are on the mental health struggle space, then you're more likely to have greater struggles. And obviously, if you're not on that spectrum, you could be moving towards that spectrum if you haven't taken the appropriate steps to be well, and to learn how to be well, and to learn how to manage all of those 5 pillars that we've covered off just from the fun facts aspect. Is how we can optimize all of those.
And if you look at it from the OPA formula, which again goes back to Viktor Frankl, because all 3, OP and A, can also be incorporated into, you see, in Prisoners of Our Thoughts, into the 7 principles of logotherapy. And people are losing connection, because they're social distancing. We can't go to certain places. We can't go out to eat together a lot of times. And that is having a negative impact on meaning. Where our ability to engage with deeper purpose in many cases is starting to decrease because people are losing their jobs. They're working, in places, in things that maybe they didn't plan on doing. And so they're feeling their purpose in life, in many respects, seems to be negatively impacted. And then their attitude, obviously. I mean, people's attitudes. Some people are so afraid that they'll walk across the street rather than be near you. All right, if you're not wearing a mask, or if they're not sure if you're vaccinated or whatever. I mean, it's just, the absurdity. I can't tell you how absurd this is. And I'm telling you this as somebody who's been around the block a few times. This is not right. There's something wrong here. And I know we weren't going to get into the politics. But I just don't understand how we can allow humanity to suffer so much for something that really the cure is worse than the disease right now.
And I think, it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is the need that we need to take responsibility and learn how to be well, and live with, the pandemic, because it's not going to go away.
It's not going away.
And vaccination isn't the single solution. There are many options in which people can take to improve their well-being, to build their immune system, to build their defenses, to recover more quickly, to minimize the risk of long COVID, to support themselves in a connected way. So just as an example, as soon as COVID hit, I knew, being in the military and serving from a military response perspective during COVID, I knew that there was going to be a lockdown. So one of the first things I did was set up a social Facebook group for our immediate community, and with post-it flyers that went through every door, 100 households that went round before the government pulled lockdown. And now we have a much stronger community in our neighbourhood, because people have been able to leverage the social media network to help each other. And to connect with each other outdoors. We do a lot more, interestingly, a lot more interaction in the neighbourhood because of this than we used to pre-COVID. But it's again going back to finding some meaning in this. How can we leverage the situation we are in to create a better future, and to find the meaning that we can attribute to this, and and build a human race that is resilient, but also empathic and supportive to each other, not destructive to each other, and in not creating, having history repeat itself because we're focusing on the negative and not looking at the opportunities, or as I said, the meaning in it. So I'd love to, and we're coming on time now, but we could, I think we could probably talk.
We could.
I'd love, people are really struggling now with COVID in finding some meaning in their lives, or because of the situations that they've been thrown into, and this is causing them a huge amount of pain and suffering. What would your one piece of advice be from all of your research, from all of the work that you've done, to help people find meaning and help them unchain the pain that they may be experiencing in the context of this spiritual well-being that we covered in this show?
Well, let me answer probably in 2 or maybe even 3 steps. I think the first thing, and again, in Prisoners of Our Thoughts, there's a whole little section on fear, the notion of fear. Right now, over the last 2 years, but especially in this last year, societies around the world, cultures around the world have been really fueled by fear. And fear is something that is really, I think, driving a lot of people in a downward spiral. And so my first recommendation is to understand that courage, in order to be responsible, is not the absence of fear. It's the ability and the willingness to go through the fear. And I think that the idea of going through the fear means that we have to, again, I know it sounds like it's a marketing pitch, but we have to not be prisoners of our thoughts. We have to be able to get out of that inner mental prison and understand that fear is probably the thing that is going to be most debilitating to us as we go forward. We have to be more open to the possibilities and opportunities that still lie ahead, rather than looking in the rearview mirror. So fear, so dealing with fear and helping people get through fear is one step. The other step is to look at meaning in the simplest way would be to look at it in the context of OPA. The OPA concept, again, is built on 3 elements, and we've studied this. We've done empirical research on this. Is that the 3 elements? We actually did a regression analysis about what OP&A means in terms of its impact. O is that others component, connect meaningfully, authentically with others. So the idea here is that if you're finding yourself alone, you've got to find alternative venues, alternative vehicles, alternative pathways to connect with others. Okay, and so do the thing you did. Your community group was fantastic. So building your O is an important element of meaning. P is engaging with deeper purpose, finding another purpose. Maybe you lost your job, maybe you lost a loved one. I mean, there's so many things that are causing pain in societies today around the world. And so helping others find a purpose is an important purpose in itself. And then the A in OPA is embrace life, all of life with attitude, which is hard for a lot of people to do, because they say, okay, well, how can I can't be smiling and, just be happy every day. Well, actually, in a way, I'm not talking about happiness in the sense of what we think about happiness. I'm talking about finding deeper joy and appreciating life. And so changing your attitude, because you can't really be happy if you're a prisoner in a concentration camp, but you can still find joy in other ways. You can still, Dr. Frankl would say, I love the sunset last night, as he's looking through, you know what I mean? I mean, there are other ways of doing it. And I know this sounds like pop psychology, but this is based on experience, personal experience, and the work they've done with Frankl and the work that you've done in your life. And so the idea is that where you're low in A, you got to find some other O or P to help bring up the A. You did that with your community and with the clients you work with. If you're high on A, hopefully you can help people find a deeper purpose. You know what I mean? So the idea is that the reason we wrote the Opal Way and the reason we came up with this concept is that we wanted to demystify what the search for meaning was about, because not everybody can understand all of the logotherapeutic principles that are in Prisoners of Our Thoughts, because it's a lot harder to maintain and understand. It's kind of like, what are the 7 habits of highly effective people? Stephen Covey wrote the foreword to our book. Well, I can probably remember 2 or 3 of them. I don't know what the other others are. And so we wanted something to be really simple. So we chose the OP&A acronym because it's
others, purpose, and attitude.
It's a Greek word. It's a Greek concept. It's OPA. And if you say OPA with enthusiasm, you cannot feel anything but better. So that would be what I leave people with is that you can find meaning. I mean, you've got to be able to see yourself as a human spirit who's resilient, more resilient than you can even imagine.
Yeah.
And that you can, in fact, find a deeper sense of self by practicing some of these principles and doing some of the things to unchain your pain through brain health training, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's really powerful as the Opal Way, which is the importance of connecting with others and doing that in ways that we haven't done before.
That's right.
And that finding purpose. And if you're connecting with others differently, you can find purpose in that new way of connecting.
Absolutely.
And as you said, finally, is that attitude, is leveraging your ability to choose your attitude in that situation, and also leveraging your emotions in a positive way, because it's okay to feel negative, but we can leverage the power of those that allows us to move forward in life and not eat us up inside. Anger can be really good if it moves us forward. It's almost like a passion with extra energy, isn't it, when we get angry about things? So,
well, escaping the prison of your thoughts, your inner thoughts, is very similar to unchaining your pain.
Yeah,
that's what it means, right? It's
exactly the same
breaking the chains, right? And so this is an important element that I think if people could grasp that and practice that, I guarantee that it'll make a difference in your life.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Alice. And I would love to know, how can people best get hold of you to learn more about the amazing work that you're doing, the books that we've spoken about on the show, and how they can really find that deeper meaning in their lives?
Well, our website is globalmeaninginstitute.com. All right. And you can email me at info@globalmeaninginstitute.com. You can certainly find me if you Google or any search engine. You can find other connections, the Psychology Today, the social media, and so forth. I'd be happy to hear from anybody and any feedback that you receive. I'd love for you to share that with me as well.
Absolutely. And I'd love for you to come back on the show if you have time, once we talked about your new book.
Absolutely.
And if you'd be willing, it would be fantastic to continue.
I'd love to do that. And that will get us into the political realm.
I know it would, but sometimes we have to go to places that are uncomfortable.
But in a good way, in a kind way. It's about society, right?
Right. And it's about our human race, ultimately, isn't it?
That's right.
And creating a better future for us.
Future for everybody.
For everybody.
Right. Absolutely. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much for coming on the show. As you know, everyone, this show is all about brain health and unchaining your pain. You're not stuck with the pain you have. You can make it better. And we're here with these fantastic guests like Dr. Alex to help show you how. Dr. Alex, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
To you by WINJECT Studios. We are an all-in-one educational platform for podcasters that revolutionizes how hosts leverage content to increase engagement with listeners, downloads, and income. We come together to focus on community, collaboration, and collective impact. For more information on how you can interact directly with our hosts, access exclusive live content with offers you can't get anywhere else from our official partners, join our purpose-driven community by visiting www.winject.com. If you're ready to build a career doing what you love, then we're ready to see you there.